So we're going to be talking about the book of Job today. Speaking in Our Suffering is what it's called. And we're going to specifically focus on just a couple verses that we read, specifically Job 42, 7, and 8, where it talks about Job speaking rightly to God. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for us? But in order to get there, this is where we are talking about the entire book of Job, because we have to figure out, what is Job about? What is this book talking about? If we're going to understand what those words at the end of the book mean. So, again, we're going to do this pretty fast, but I would ask if you have a Bible that you kind of follow along with us. We'll jump around a little bit, but the first big question that we have with the book of Job is, what is the book of Job about? Right? So this is hard. I teach a class on the wisdom literature, on the book of Job is like a big part of it. And this is a long book. It's a complicated book. A lot of it's poetry, and we're not big poetry people in the modern world today. And it's Hebrew poetry, and so it's really difficult. And sometimes working through what is this book trying to say can be not as easy as we hope it would be. And so one of the things that people suggest is, well, is this book about why bad things happen to good people, right? That was a huge book that came out in like the 1960s, 1970s. There was a rabbi that wrote a book about the book of Job, and that was his main point. But that is not the point of Job. And we know that that's not the point of Job because Job never really understands why he was suffering. In fact, if we're really honest, we don't understand why Job is suffering. So let's go through and we'll think about the beginning of the book of Job and consider what some of the ways that it kind of undermines our expectations are. So the book of Job begins, and it tells us about Job. He is extremely righteous, and it actually tells us all of the righteous things that he does, and it even says that when his kids have a feast or a party, he'll go and he'll sacrifice just in case they did something sinful, right? So he's got all the bases covered. And it actually comes back later on in the book of Job. One of Job's friends says, well, maybe it's not you that sinned, and that's why all of this is happening. Maybe one of your children did. But we already know that that's not the case because it's already covered. And so it spends this time telling us how righteous Job is. And then we get the super confusing, unexpected scene. Satan comes. God says to Satan, have you seen Job? He's righteous in every way. And Satan says to him, well, Job, he only acts that way because you're good to him. If you stop being good to him, he's going to curse you. And so this is, again, where we can get caught up a little bit. There are certain people that really like to get into the spiritual warfare world and all of this stuff, and maybe get a little too into this portion. But we're going to see that this is kind of the setup for the entire book of Job, but maybe not in the way that we think it is. Because I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you read the book of Job, what you expect is this storyline. So Job is righteous. Satan challenges God and says to him that if you stop being good to Job, then he'll stop being righteous, and he'll accuse you, he'll curse you. And then we have the whole book of Job, and then we get to the end, and Job stays righteous, and God wins the bet over Satan. That's what we expect. But that's not what we get in the book of Job, right? So I have a slide up here. I don't know how easy it is to read it, but Job subverts it. It undermines our churchy expectations of what this book should be about. It should be a book about how Job suffers perfectly, and he remains righteous, and God wins the bet with Satan. But when we see this book, so first we have the challenge, and this is the thing that starts the action in the book. Satan challenges God. Job is the subject of this challenge. And so we expect that to be resolved, but it never gets resolved. We never have God's victory dance over Satan because Job stayed righteous, right? So something else is going on here. We get verses like Job 1:22. It says, in all of this, Job did not sin and he did not accuse God. Well, that's great. That's wonderful. I've heard a number of great sermons about how we should be righteous sufferers like Job, that even though all of these things happened, and then it says it again in chapter 2, that he did not speak against God, that he didn't do what Satan expects that he will do. And the problem with this is that this is at the beginning of the book, not the end of the book. The first 2 chapters, they say these things. But as we go through the book, Job does say some shocking things. And he ultimately does accuse God. And we know this because at the end of the book, what Ben read this morning, Job actually repents of the things that he said to God. And so we expect a book that is easy, neat, simple. Suffer well, remain righteous, God wins the bet, God will praise you. But that's not what the book of Job is. We get the discussions, this big section in the middle of the book that most of the book of Job is about. And we expect that Job will remain steadfast. He'll say only good, righteous things that we can put on nice verse art things that we can put on our Facebook or Instagram page. But he doesn't do that, right? He says, we expect that Job is going to remain righteous, and he is, but he's not always right. He says some things that are really, really scary, okay? That if we heard one of our friends or our church members speak to them, we would probably, maybe not say to them, but we might think, you can't say that about God, right? But those are the things that Job says. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this is, as Don and Maya mentioned, over this past month, this has been a really rough month, right? A lot of stuff has happened. A lot of people have lost a lot, and there's been personal loss, and so many things. And the question is, what does it mean to suffer rightly? What does it mean in Job when it says that Job spoke rightly to or about God, right? Because this is a big deal. Doesn't mean that when we suffer, we smile, we count it pure joy, and we slap on a smile, and we put our testimony out for all to see, or does it mean more than that? It can mean that, absolutely. It can definitely mean that, but does it mean something else as well? And so Job is a big book. I'm not going to say that there can't be more than one message, because I think that this is a book in some ways that does show us how to suffer well, but not in the way that we first expect. Not in the churchy way that maybe is the easy way that you first think the book is showing us, right? But ultimately, the book of Job is a book about God's justice. How does God choose to run the world? Now, we only have a couple minutes here this morning. I don't have a lot of time to go over the whole book. I'm going to encourage you, when you go home, to watch the Bible Project video on the book of Job. It's excellent. It's about 13 minutes. Summarizes the book very well. But this first event when Satan challenges God, this is what sets, again, the action in motion. And what's it really about? How does God choose to run the world? Do people only follow him? Do they only act righteously because God always honors that, and so they get good? Or does he choose to run the world in a different way, right? So, if we think that God always honors only what is right, we're very much like Job's friends. And so they have this big dialogue. It says good things about them at first. It says, when Job was suffering, well, first of all, his wife, not great in this circumstance, she says, all of these things, we've had people who've lost possessions, that have lost loved ones, that have experienced physical ailments. Like Job had all of those things. He lost everything he owned. He lost all of his family except for his wife. And he physically was afflicted. All of these things happen at once. And then his wife says, well, clearly you should just curse God and die. And then his friends come, and at first it's good. It says for 7 days, they just sat with him. They just sat, didn't say anything. They comfort him with silence, which in a lot of ways can be the best way, just to grieve with someone. But then they start to speak. And the things that they say sound really good to us. If you are going to go, if you wanted to go into the book of Job this week and to look at some of the things that the friends say, just pick out some verses. almost every time you read them, they're going to sound really good to you. They're going to sound really right. Because what the friends are doing, Job's three friends, is they're looking at the world and saying, basically, God has given us the book of Proverbs, right? The book of Proverbs, it says, if you do this, this will probably happen. If you work hard, you'll probably be successful. If you're lazy, you will probably be poor and fall into, like bad circumstances. But the thing about, even about the book of Proverbs is it's about principles. It's not like promises of God. If you do this, this will always happen. It's showing you how the world is supposed to work. But sometimes the world is broken. And probably a lot of us have experienced that, where we did work hard the way we were supposed to, and it didn't work out. We honored God, and it didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to. So Job's friends come along, and they're basically saying the book of Proverbs is always true. And they're using that as a weapon against Job. So they're saying, if God always honors what is right, and you are in bad circumstances now, you clearly sinned. They're trying to work backwards. And they're trying to live in a world where it's not broken, and the book of Proverbs is always right. And that's why it sounds so good to us. When we start to read what the friends say, like so much of it agrees with so much of what the Bible says in other places. But they live in a world in which there are no exceptions to that rule, in which bad things don't happen, right? Unless you did something bad. And I think that a lot of us have enough wisdom to realize in the big sense that this is not true. In the very big sense, nowadays we call this prosperity theology. That if you give God a lot of money, he's going to give money back to you. Or if you do the right thing, then good things will happen to you and God will honor you. And so we recognize it in the big sense, but sometimes in the small sense, we miss it. I'm having a really bad day today because I skipped my Bible reading, or because I yelled at my kids, or something like that. We have this mini sense where there's transactions always going on with God, that if I do the right thing, the right things will happen to me. And if I do the wrong things will happen to me. And that's the world in which Job's friends live, in which there are no exceptions. And so they say, God is always just. He always rules the world according to justice. So, bad things are happening to you. You are a bad person. Okay? Job, on the other hand, he knows, the entire book, he's always talking about his innocence. He knows that he doesn't pretend he's totally and completely blameless, but he knows he hasn't done the wrong things that his friends are saying. And so Job has a really difficult choice in front of him. So he also lives in a world in which God should always run the world according to justice. And so he looks and he says, unjust things are happening to me. So that means one of two things. Either God doesn't always run the world according to justice, or God himself is unjust. And this is the struggle that Job goes through in the entire book. And so the whole purpose of the book is about this question, this big question. How does God choose to run the world? Does he always run it according to justice or not? Oops. Sorry. This is where we see, as I said, Job struggle a lot. He says some things that if our friends said them, we would not appreciate them very much. We might not know how to respond. I have a list of them here if you wanted to track them down, but I'm just going to summarize them. It says in Job 9:22 through 23, Job says that God destroys the blameless and mocks the innocent. Okay? 16:9, he says, God is attacking me. 27:2, he asks the question, why has God denied me justice? In 27:8, he asks a really, what feels like such a hopeless question. He says, what hope do people have against God? If things like this can happen to me, what hope does anyone have against God? And again, this is a circumstance where if our our friends, maybe a member of our church or a small group or something, they're going through something difficult, and they say something like this, we may have our first response be to say, you can't say things like that. You can't accuse God. Job's emotions are intense, and he says things that are wrong. We get to the end of Job speaking in chapter 30, and he has, at that point, he's been speaking a lot, and he's always using these words throughout the book that have to do with a courtroom. He talks about presenting his case and about how God is judge and how he's going to present an accusation and he's going to make his plea. And so ultimately he does that. And again, we know that Job has done something wrong. He's crossed a line because God speaks back to him. He answers Job. And Job, at first, he says, okay, God, you've spoken to me, and I realize that I was wrong. I'm going to be quiet now. And God speaks more. And then Job says, I repent, right? So he understands that he has done something wrong. So we need to make sure we get that too, that Job does not do everything right in this book. So if we're going to hold up Job as a righteous sufferer, we need to figure out what that means. Does it mean always saying and doing the right thing? What is it God is praising him for, actually? So I do want to think about God's response to Job as we're working through and thinking, because some people don't like God's response to Job. Job says, I am unjustly suffering. This is difficult. I want an answer from you, God. And God answers by giving Job a tour of the universe. And there's a writer, he's a non-Christian, Bernard Shaw, and he says about God's answer, he basically says it's not an answer. He says, if I am suffering unjustly, it's no answer to say, can you make a hippopotamus, right? And if we're honest, maybe we felt that way sometimes. So what is God's answer about? What is he trying to say? Again, I think it's really important that we notice that maybe even if we don't understand God's answer at first, Job does. He understands that what God is saying is an answer to his questions. And that's why he repents. So I think there's a lot of things we could say, but there's one particular passage that I think really helps us to understand God's response. And it's in Job 38, 25 through 27. You might not understand where I'm going at first, so I want to give you a little bit of explanation for it. So turn to Job 38. It says, God is giving kind of his tour of the universe, and he says, who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain, and a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on a land where no man is, on a desert in which there's no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass. Now, I'm taking this out of course, a big section here. There's a lot going on. But I want us to consider a passage in the book of Matthew that might help us to get what's going on here. So there's this passage in the book of Matthew where the disciples come to Jesus and they say, well, what about these people that tower fell on, Jesus? Were they more wicked than everyone else because the tower fell on them? In other words, were they really bad people and that's why bad things happened to them? And Jesus says, well, that's not how it works, because God causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust, okay? So we understand this principle. We've heard this before. God causes rain to fall on the just and unjust. But what does this passage say in the book of Job? It says, God causes rain to fall on a place where there's no people. No people at all, right? So we frame our understanding of a lot of texts, of a lot of things God does, are these people bad or are they good? Is God doing this because someone's acting wickedly or not? And God, in his tour of the universe, is saying to Job, there are a billion things going on in this universe at any given time, and I hold all of them together. And truthfully, so many of them have nothing to do with your life, Job. They have nothing to do with whether you're good or bad, but they're happening, and I'm controlling them. From our perspective, our life is about us, right? We're the star of our life. And God's answer to Job is that, Job, you are not the center of the universe. And if you had the chance to run the universe, you wouldn't be able to do it. And that's basically Job's understanding that he comes to. God says to him, if you were holding all of these things together, your little tiny, puny human brain would just explode because there's so many things going on. And they're all wrapped in a billion things that you as a human could not understand. That's the purpose of God's tour. And that's why Job takes it as an answer. Job saw himself as the center in a lot of ways. He's asking a lot of questions about why God is doing this to him. And we know from the beginning of the book of Job that it doesn't have anything to do with whether Job did something wrong or not. It's something totally separate from that. And so it becomes about God's justice. And if we go back to Job's kind of dilemma, does God not always run the universe according to justice, or is he unjust? It's that first one. God doesn't always run the universe according to justice. And there's one of the commentators on the book of Job. He has a really great quote, which I unfortunately did not keep in here. It says that the answer to this kind of dilemma is grace. If God were to always run the universe according to justice, none of us would have a chance, right? But God, in his infinite wisdom, has chosen to do something different. He's chosen to pour out mercy on us, to let us live, to let us continue. And even though we always frame our lives according to good thing happens to me, bad thing happens to me. Am I being righteous or unrighteous? How is God treating me based on that? That's not how God has chosen to run the world. He has poured out his mercy and his grace on us, and it's only through that grace we receive anything good. Right? That is the answer that God gives to Job. That's what this whole issue of justice is about. So this has been super cognitive, heady, right? We've been talking about a lot of facts. But I want to go back to our key text for today, which is Job 42, verses 7 and 8. What does it mean that Job spoke rightly? So in all of this, we have this whole big, long story of the book of Job that we have heard about, and we've kind of touched on some of the big themes. But then something that I think is incredibly unexpected, if you've been following along with the book, happens. And it says, God speaks to Job's friends, and he says, well, you guys, you need to have Job sacrifice for you, because I am not happy with you. I'm angry with you, friends, because you have not spoken rightly of me like Job has spoken. Well, we just had this whole thing where God responded to Job because he said something that was wrong, right? Job accused God. We've seen some of the things he said, and then God is saying, Job spoke rightly. And so this verse, there's so much written on this verse, trying to understand this verse, and I'm not going to pretend like I know everything. Before we get more emotional, we're going to get really academic for a second, okay? Because translation is hard. We have most people in here, you probably speak more than one language in one sense or another. We have some Bible translators in here, and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. But on this particular verse, I think there's a choice that maybe in most translations could be made, but it's not being made, because there is this construction here. What it says here, that Job spoke, is just the normal word for spoke in the Hebrew Bible. And almost every time it's translated with the preposition here, it's someone spoke to someone else, right? Even earlier on in Job 42:7, it says, after the Lord had spoken all these things to Job, after the Lord had spoken these things to Job. Same construction, same everything. And then the translations will often say, you have not spoken about me rightly, like Job has. But I want to suggest to you that I think the better way to understand it in the context of the book of Job and just grammatically, again, I know this is super academic, is that what God is actually saying to the friends is, you have not spoken to me rightly, like Job has. That's the normal way we would translate this phrase. So what does that mean? Now we have a whole new set of questions. What did Job say to God? Well, we know it could refer maybe to his repentance, that he has just repented right before that. But I think there's some clues throughout the book that really help us. And this is something that I don't know that you've noticed when you read through the book of Job. Job's friends speak about God in certain ways. Job almost always speaks to God. Okay? The friends are speaking about God. They say things. God does things this way. But Job, he'll respond to the friends, and he'll say things about God sometimes too. But so much of what he says is speaking directly to God. And I think there is where we're missing an understanding. When God says, you have not spoken to me rightly, like Job has. Job's struggle is not mental. It's a heart struggle. He is trying to find relationship with God. And so I want to look just at a couple different places. In chapter 13, there are a number of things that demonstrate this, but I want to look particularly at verses 20 and 21, and then 22 through 25. So Job, he's really struggling, and this is representative of a lot of things that Job says. But he says, only grant me two things, that I will not hide myself from your face, and don't withdraw your hand from me. And let not the dread of you terrify me. Then I will then call, and I will answer, or let me speak, and you reply to me. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy? Will you frighten a driven leaf or pursue dry chaff? So again, Job's struggle here, it's not just this philosophical struggle about the problem of evil. It's an emotional struggle with the problem of evil. He's not asking always, why do bad things happen to good people? He's saying, God, personally, why have you withdrawn your hand from me? And he speaks directly to God. And this makes all the difference. Okay, so there's another one in Job 14:13. It says, oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath passed, that you would point me a set time, and that you would remember me. So much of what Job does is speaking directly to God. And we've already said, the things that Job says to God are not always nice. The things that Job says about God are not always right. But God still commends Job. Why? I'm going to suggest to you that maybe in our suffering, we might say wrong things. We might think wrong things. But what does God seek from us in our suffering? It is relationship with him. We're not talking about some out there problem of evil that's philosophical. Of course, that is important, and there have been many very smart people that have dealt with it. But on our own personal level, what is it that we're doing? I was talking with my wife about this week, because it was about, she said, make sure that they know it wasn't last week. It was like 3 years ago. So just know that. This was like 3 years ago, not last week. We had this huge fight. And we didn't talk to each other for 3 days. Okay? 3 days. I'm not holding this up as a good example, just so you know. And the funny thing about it is we're talking about it this week, and I said, I kind of want to mention this. And she goes, do you even remember what it was about? And I was like, no. But I was probably wrong. You know, like, it was such a big deal at the time. And let me tell you, those 3 days, they didn't help anyone. I don't know, there's this thing that came out a couple months ago. There's a Japanese TV show, and it's like this hidden camera type thing. And these 3 adult children got their parents together because they kind of wrote into this TV show, and they said, our dad has not spoken to our mom for 23 years. Okay? They're married. What happened was that she had kids, started having babies. He felt that she started ignoring him, and so he's just like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. So she would say things to him, and he would just like nod his head or grunt for 23 years. That is grudge commitment right there. Like, that is some serious commitment. But let me tell you, their relationship went nowhere. Our relationship, when we were fighting, we're not talking to each other, it went nowhere. Nothing got fixed, nothing happened. So what are we doing with God when we suffer? Are we waiting to get it all together so that we can tell people that we had it all together? Where are we going in our suffering? Are we speaking to God, or are we speaking about God? Are we just shutting God out? Because I think when we ask, how do we suffer responsibly? If Job is giving us an example of how to suffer responsibly, the one that we tend to go toward is way early on in the book, where it says, in all these things, Job, he didn't accuse God, and he bowed down and he worshiped. And that's our Christian ideal of what we should do. That no matter what happens, We don't say anything wrong, and we worship. And that is great. It is very good, and we should honor that. But God also honors Job for his honesty, that he is going to God. He's not just doing the right thing. He is honestly speaking to God. And so that moves us into kind of another question. Oops, I keep pushing the wrong way. How should we then speak, if this is our example? And I'm going to say to you, obviously we've got a little nerdy and academic there for a minute about what Job is about and what this has to do, but the Bible consistently puts forward this kind of talking in our suffering in front of us. So the first thing, the Bible talks about honesty in our sadness. There's an entire book, the book of Psalms. It's all songs, 150 of them. And 40% of the Psalms are lament psalms. Those are the Psalms when the writer is struggling with something. Either they feel abandoned by God or their enemies are surrounding them, but they're deeply sad and they're bringing that sadness to God. And sometimes those things that are said, again, might make us uncomfortable. For example, Psalm 22. It starts out and it says, "Oh, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish?" Right? The psalmist says, "God, you've forsaken me. It feels like you're God. Why have you done that?" Again, very, very honest. And let's remember as well that these are the words that Jesus spoke from the cross. He cites Psalm 22. He's bringing up this psalm. Later on in the psalm, it talks about how enemies are surrounding him, and he's bringing these things to God. A lot of the lament psalms say things that in a nice, proper, good church context might make people really, really, truly uncomfortable. There's another kind of psalm, too. Ones that we don't like to talk about. They're kind of like, well, my mom, she has a problem with keeping too much stuff. I wouldn't say she goes as far as being a hoarder, but we're very close to that line if we're not over the line. But I don't know how many of you, maybe you grew up in a house like this, where there's this room that when guests come over, you just close the door, right? Because the guests don't see that room because that's where you stuff all the junk, right, when you're cleaning up. And you just don't open the door too quickly lest the mountain of stuff fall on top of you, right? So that's what the imprecatory psalms are, I think, for most of us, because these psalms, these go one past the psalms of lament. These psalms are ones that ask for God to do terrible things to the writer's enemies, right? It says things like, "I wish that they were completely cut off, that you would blot them out of the book of life, and that you would pour out your wrath upon them because they have been doing things to me that are wrong." Okay, so these are Psalms, if you want to follow up later for a happy read, it's going to be Psalm 35, 55, 69, and 109 are the main ones. But they say things that are really shocking. Well, why is this important? Because what is the psalmist doing? He is giving those things to God. They're bringing those honest feelings and saying, these people are doing evil things. There are so many things going on in the world today, even, that are wicked, that are bad. People are being killed, and they're even worse things than just being killed are happening. And it is okay for us to long for justice in that. What the psalm writers are doing here is they are asking God to take that justice, and then they don't do it. They are giving that anger to God and not acting it out, right? So we see honesty in sadness. We see honesty in anger in these psalms. And there's one more thing I want to talk about, and this is just a quick verse in Romans chapter 8. So we're jumping to the New Testament, but Romans 8 has a lot to say about suffering, that our present sufferings are not even worth comparing with the joy that's going to come. There's just so many things in this chapter that are so good, but there's one that I think really speaks to this, and it's in Romans 8:26. It says, after talking about all these things, about how the creation itself groans, like there's no words even, and that we are groaning to be adopted, it says much farther down, it says, likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we don't know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. So I think this is painting for us a picture, the Psalms, We can be honest in our sadness and frustration. We can be honest in our anger. And this is just a wordless cry. Like sometimes something happens and you don't know how to say anything. You don't know how, you're not even at the point of being angry with God or some other person. It's just grief. And God's word says that he hears even that. You can bring that to him. When you don't know how to feel, when you don't know what to say or what even the right thing to say might be, God feels just that. And he hears that. And he knows that. Okay? So what does it mean to speak rightly in our suffering? Again, I'm not in any way trying to undermine. If you go through something and your faith remains so unshakable and you always say the right thing, that is good, and that should be commended. But I want us all here to know as well that God's word puts forth other things too, that emotions in our hearts, in our lives, they're signals for important things that are going on in us. It's not that we should let them rule us, but God is not afraid of our honesty. And this is where I think maybe we get caught up a little, that we always need to say the right thing in our suffering or do the right thing in our suffering. I think we have too high of opinion of ourselves, of how much we're saying and doing correctly in any given day. Like, if we really understand how far off the mark we are and we really come to terms with the amount of sin in our lives, we would probably give up on this idea that we could ever speak something right or do something right in our suffering. And so God is saying to Job, he's not afraid of Job, right? God is powerful. God knows what's going on. He knows why it's going on. But Job comes to him seeking relationship, right? Giving God silence, or trying to give God silence, does not help you. It doesn't do anything. And God's not afraid of you saying or doing something wrong. It's why he's poured out his grace on us. It's why we need his grace, because we can't do the right things. So, in your grief, whatever it is, there could be anything. Even in the Bible, like Job went through so many things that were so bad. But then you have, like in the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 2, the writer of Ecclesiastes, he says that work stinks. Like, work is so bad and it's so frustrating, and so I hate my life. Direct quote from book of Ecclesiastes, right? So suffering is big things and it's small things. Where are you going with that? Where are you going with that suffering? Are you trying to just like buckle up, white knuckle through life, and just always try and think and do the right thing? Or are you going to God and saying, God, I don't understand. Help me to understand, because it feels like you've forsaken me. It feels like I don't know how to handle this. But God, I trust you. And that's the key, is that trust, that relationship, seeking more relationship. Because Job, he says wrong things, but he repents of them. He has the humility when God responds to him to say, I did not do the right thing. I did not say the right thing. And he humbles himself before God. And there's actually another passage in the New Testament, 1 Peter 5:7. We actually know one part of it really well. It says, cast all your cares or your anxieties on him because he cares for you. But the first part of the verse actually says that we need to humble ourselves before God. It's talking about the proud and the humble. Like what our attitude toward relationship with God should be. And then it says, cast all your cares, your anxieties on him, right? So we come seeking relationship, but we do it in trust. We do it in faith, knowing that we're not always going to say or do the right thing. But God is there. He is in control. He is sovereign. And so we seek relationship with Jesus. We say, Jesus, even when we don't know why we're suffering, like Job never knew why he suffered. Jesus, we love you even when we don't know why we're suffering. Jesus, we love you even when we don't have the answers. Jesus, we love you even when we don't have words. Like, no words will come out, and it's just grief. And so many times the Bible is there, and it's saying God hears that, and he knows that. And he is the God of all comfort, and he will come to you in that. But where are you going? How do you speak in suffering? Is it just giving a good testimony? No, it's seeking and knowing God and waiting on him. The most asked question in the whole Bible is, how long? If you start to look through the Psalms, all these different books, this question shows up over and over again. How long? Well, that's a question of faith, but it's also a question of desperation, right? People are seeing what's happening. Something's happening in their life, and they go to God and they say, how long, O Lord? They're not saying, God, will you do something? They believe that he will, but they're just saying, how long? How long? And so there's faith, there's trust in that, but there's also honesty, right? To know that we can't do it on our own. Job, he had a lot of questions. He had a lot of things to say, and again, not always what we expect, not always things that make us comfortable. But God was okay with those things. He confronted Job, and Job repented. But God is not afraid of your emotional honesty. So, I'm already going a little over time, but just one more thought for you. This is also what the people of God are for, right? You don't go through things by yourself. God has given us his people for these times. He's brought us together from all different countries, languages, walks of life, so many different circumstances, and we all come together in our differences because we love Jesus and we love each other. So when these things happen, the easy thing, is to just correct, like Job's friends did. Job, you can't say that, you can't do that, you must have done something wrong. But he's brought the people of God together, and I'm praying that we can be better as a people of God in coming around people who are grieving and not always feeling like we need to say something, right? Because sometimes you can't. Sometimes the person that is suffering doesn't even have the words. So why should we have the words, right? To just be with them. So I'm praying and I'm hoping for God to do a work in our hearts and in our church to come around those that are suffering and to understand that and to seek God and to help them seek God. Because maybe sometimes it feels like when you're suffering, you don't even know how to do that anymore. You don't know how to speak to God and be honest with him. But that's why we are here as a church, right? To really know each other and to be here for each other. So let's pray, and we're going to have a song of response. God, we thank you for the book of Job. It's long and it's complicated, and there's so much going on, but God, we thank you for this example that really undermines so many of our expectations about what it means to suffer, what the purpose of the book itself is, what the questions of our life should be. And God, we pray that you would put a strong trust in our heart, a strong faith that is strong enough to be able to ask hard questions, but to go to you with those hard questions. To seek, above all, relationship with you, to not just ask or talk to other people about the terrible things that are happening, but to go to you and to ask you. To open a dialogue and to continue this dialogue with you, because we know that in relationship with you, we are changed. And we thank you for your transforming grace that you have poured out on us. We thank you for the power of your Spirit. We thank you for your people, God, that you have brought us together because we have the joint purpose of knowing you and of making you known. And we ask that you would unite us under that and that we would truly know and truly care for one another. And we can only do this in your power and by your love, Jesus. And we know there are so many difficult things that are going on in all of our lives and in the world, and we ask that you would come quickly, Lord Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen.